Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you on this happy Wednesday for joining us for our weekly study. Sorry for the pause we took last week. I had some grandparent duties that jumped in, and happy to take care of that and spend some time with them. But glad to be back. And as you remember, we are going through the book of Daniel, and things are heating up here as the interaction between Daniel and the three Hebrew children, as they're called, um, starts to become more intense. So just to recap, looking at verse 4 on your screen, the king had a dream, and the king, for whatever reason, didn't want to tell the dream to his wise men. So he calls them. Says he has this dream that's just bothering him so much, and so that's where we pick up in verse 5, and you begin to see what I like to at least say is divine intervention, because the king is acting somewhat irrationally. Not that that's an uncommon thing. People in high positions with lots of power have been known to act very irrationally. And so the king is doing that. And so he calls his wise men, which we're going to see that it seems that Daniel and his friends were not included in this group. And so why that happened, I don't know. We'll speculate about that a little bit further on as we go. But so you have the setting in your mind. The king has called his wise men. Daniel and his Hebrew friends are not there. And he says, Tell me, interpret this dream. And so they answered and said, Tell us what the dream was. And the king answers and says, No, I'm not going to tell you. You tell me what I dreamt. Then I will know that when you interpret this, it is the right thing. Otherwise, you guys could just be making something up, and I wouldn't have any clue. But this is a way that I will know that you know, and know that you're not just bluffing, know that you're not just having a creative writing or dream interpretation session. Tell me what my dream was, and then I will know that when you give me the interpretation, it's going to be what it is. And then here comes the pressure. Um, he said, If you don't tell me this, I'm going to cut you in pieces and your houses will be an ash heap. So again, what we don't know is whether the king possibly forgot the dream and was too embarrassed to say, or whether he was testing them. I'll let you kind of think that through as we go through it, because it's not clear. So anyway, they are in a pressure situation. The version that we're looking at here has a very nice interpretation. It says, Your houses will be an ash heap. Well, let's dig into that a little bit more and see what an ash heap meant back then, because we see some other interpretations that the King James has a dunghill, which is, again, gives us a little bit of a different interpretation or understanding, talks about refuge heap. We find that this word, of course, is Aramaic. It's only used 3 times in the Tanakh or Hebrew Bible, as we're looking at. Hebrew Aramaic Bible. And so King James puts it as a dunghill or a pile of manure. So again, you can understand this is not a very pleasant experience they're going through. The king has just got to be boiling mad, spewing out, obscenities, and this seems to be one of those. And you can insert your own word for whatever you think he might have said, translated in English. But the end result can be very plain that this is not going to bode well for all of his wise men. Now, this is interesting here. How angry this king must have been. He then kind of does a little bit of a about face, and he says, But if you interpret the dream, you're going to be loaded with gifts and rewards and honor. You'll be great. You'll receive, all kinds of accolades from me, and you're going to be good. So imagine the pressure these guys felt. So we get to verse 7, and they said unto him, Wait a minute, tell us the dream, and then we'll tell you the interpretation. And the king said, I know for certain, that you would gain, this would gain you time. So again, I'm reading into this, did the king forget and was too embarrassed to say, or was he really putting these guys to the test? And maybe he had some previous situations with them where he was not certain that they were giving him the best advice, or that, you know, you can kind of picture this here that the king's in power, and people who love being sustained by that follow the king, are on his every dote on his every word, lavish praise upon him and accolades and brown nose him, as we sometimes use the term. So these are the type of people that are around him, and maybe he's a little suspicious that they're just in it for the money, in it for the prestige. Maybe he truly knows that they really don't have any power whatsoever. So you kind of see this, the story setting up here. And as I like to interject, is I believe there's divine intervention in here. Maybe God is causing the king to act this way so that his power can be shown, so that it will set up this episode for Daniel and his friends to make their declaration and their witness of the one true God. We see, as I'm saying this, I'm reminded of a very similar situation in the Exodus with Pharaoh. Pharaoh acted very irrationally. He wouldn't let the people go. It gives the indication that God strengthened his hearts. Again, beautiful study on what strengthened is versus what hardened is. Depends upon which translation you read. That you know, God just allowed Pharaoh to continue in the way he was going, and not succumb to the pressure that was upon him, because he really didn't want to let the people go. And so, if he would have gave in earlier, it would have been for the wrong reasons. And it's just interesting. I see a comparison here. So I take the camp of that God was intervening here and manipulating in the king's mind, if you will, and causing some of this irrational behavior. So we get to verse 9, and he says, which if the dream you don't make known to us, I believe you guys are all a bunch of liars. You're all corrupt. You've all agreed together to, in collaboration against me, and you're just trying to save your own skin. Again, very interesting way that he charges them. And so you can kind of see him pounding his fist on his throne, saying, "Tell me the dream, and then I shall know that you can give me the interpretation." So at this time, we're going to take a little pause and look at some of the Hebrew commentary and see. Sometimes I get too far ahead of myself here, and I forget to take a look at the Hebrew commentary, because it's very fascinating. So we see verse 5 here from the Hebrew. Um, Scholars, cut into pieces really means cutting their limbs off. Again, doesn't matter where you chop, it's still going to be not a good thing. But it does make it a little bit more personable, um, on how horrible this was going to be for his wise men. And then, of course, here you see, the dunghill. Your houses are going to be a dunghill if you don't interpret the dream. Um, they claim that this word translated dunghill is to be Akkadian. Akkadian is a even older language than Hebrew and Aramaic. Again, there are people who study this and find that it gives a lot of insight of meaning and builds upon the base of some of the Hebrew words. And so Akkadian is another ancient Semitic language that has been studied. Um, and so it talks about being destroyed. We kind of you get the gist of what's happening here. It's not going to be good for them. Talks about rewards. Again, this is a rare word. And then verse 9 talks about the laws of being um, mm, very substantial, of talking about, there's one law for you. Your law is one, and you can tell that this is not a society of kindness and benevolence and of taking care of your people and of being a good king, that you want all your subjects to love you. It's as the laws of the Medes and Persians are sometimes referenced. It's irrevocable. This is the way it is, and you're going to suffer for it, basically. And I again must have made them very, very um, challenged in what was going to happen. So we'll go back to the biblical text here, continue on with verse 10. And so they answered them, the Chaldeans, which were again a group of, were kind of given a name of the group of wise men. And so the Chaldeans, of course, were not the Hebrews. And so this is what gives us an understanding that Daniel and his friends weren't there, which is, you really wonder why. Why was this whole thing happening? Why weren't they there? Why was the king acting so irrational? And it seems that his wise men that were there, the Chaldeans, did not have any way to calm him down, did not have any way to speak to him to say, okay, they could ask for more time because we're going to find Daniel does that later. And the king grants this, but here the Chaldeans said all they were trying to do is protect themselves, and they're saying, and this is real to me very telling. He says, "There's not a man on earth that can answer the king's question. Therefore, tell us." Um, and looking in past history, there is no ruler, no king, no one who ever asked any of his advisors or magicians or Chaldeans any of these things. And in verse 11, what you're doing is so difficult, and then here is where this becomes really, I think, where we pick up and where our heart is really seeking after. They say that no one can tell the king except the gods. And here we see the word referenced of um, uh, Elohim. Now, some of you who have been listening to some of the Hebrew may be familiar with a Hebrew word for gods, God and gods meaning Elohim with a M at the end. And this is where the Aramaic takes a little bit of a diversion. In Hebrew, there are different endings that indicate masculine, feminine, singular, and plural. But there's also another one that expresses duality. It's used like when you talk about your eyes. They are, it's talked about in a plural um, format. If you talk about your ears, they come in pairs, so they're talked about in a eem plural format. And so it's interesting here that in Hebrew, it's used as a duality, as a plural. And the understanding there is to promote the grandeur. It also can explain that there is no one above. There's no one greater. There's no one that compares. There's no one that has any similar attributes. And in the Aramaic, it follows with the same type of understanding that the "-ine" ending connotates the same masculine plural. So just a little bit of comparison between the Aramaic and the Hebrew for any of you who are interested. But the part that they're bringing out is they're saying no person can do this. Only the gods can do this, and they are not dwelling with flesh. And again, I see this beautiful groundwork being laid for Daniel to come in and talk about, the one true God by this statement of the wise men talking about their limitations, talking about suddenly needing to look in a spiritual realm and realizing they don't have it. And this is interesting in a um, culture where there is a plurality of gods, multi-gods, gods of stone, gods of wood. I'm not familiar with all of the gods of the Persian and Babylonian Empire, but they were polytheistic, they were paganistic, and gods existed everywhere. But here is these wise men, the wisest ones in the kingdom, because they were serving the king, making the final understanding under intense pressure where their lives depend upon it, basically saying all these gods are fake and phony, and there's none that can answer. And even though they were supposed to maybe be representatives of those false gods, they knew they weren't going to get any answer from them. So they're exposing their sham, they're exposing the basis of the false gods that they supposedly represented do not have any power. And they talked about that God is not flesh. And again, we can think about the incarnation and God coming down and dwelling in flesh and just seeing lots of parallels here. And I think it's very, very beautiful for that reason. So as we move on, the king gets very, very angry. And these are some interesting words. Different than the anger that's somewhat seen in the Hebrew text. And so it's just very interesting. But you can picture he was very angry, says furious, and he just says the first thing that comes out of his mouth. You're going to all be dead men. We're going to destroy all the wise men. So he gave a decree. And so his men started following it because what can you do? But you got to follow the decree of the king. So, verse 13, the decree went out and they began killing the wise men. Now, this was, we're not sure, whether any deaths occurred, but obviously they had a decree. I believe somebody, especially the way this word is translated here, it's began killing. So there's a something happening here. And so they're knocking on doors, they're killing the wise men, and they found Daniel and his companions, and they were going to be next. So this would mean that Daniel wasn't there, that Daniel and his friends, his companions, weren't there. And here's where the beauty, and I believe God's hand really comes in, that Daniel answers with wisdom and counsel to this guy named Arioch, who is the captain of the guard. Now, what we don't hear is, okay, why didn't Arioch just slice him with the sword? He had the men there. They obviously were, doing it to the others. Daniel was able to speak to this gentleman and get him to stop killing, give him some understanding and some confidence that Daniel could take care of this. Probably said, "Hey, wait a minute, you go and kill everybody. The king's never going to get his answer." You can just kind of envision the wisdom which Daniel must have spoken to him to get Arioch and his captain, the captain of the guard, to take a pause, to give Daniel a chance because he says, "Hey, I wasn't there. Let me go talk to the king." And so Arioch says, "Okay, let's go and do this." He explained what was going on, which is another indication that Daniel wasn't there, didn't even know what was happening. Imagine the surprise and the shock he felt. So Daniel went into the king. Again, incredible. I believe this is a miracle from God that Daniel was able to go into the king, granted an audience. None of the other men who were under the order of the king to slay the wise men took it upon themselves to kill Daniel. Daniel was able to go in and greet the king and get the king to calm down, basically, get him to, give him time to give the interpretation. He must have had such a good relationship with Daniel that the king says, "Okay, I believe this guy. I believe that he can tell me. Let me give him a couple days. What's the difference if I kill him now or kill him later?" But I might get an interpretation and felt that Daniel and his relationship with God was so transparent and so real that the king knew that Daniel was different than the other wise men and felt he might get an answer. And so that's where we're going to stop today with verse 16. Of course, on a cliffhanger and a nail biter, what happens? Does Daniel get the answer? Does the king eventually kill him? You can read ahead and try to find out. But thank you so much for staying with us during this little story, little study that we're going through. I hope you find strength and inspiration from it. If you do, kind of click the subscribe button that you'll see on the Zoom link when it goes out. If you feel anybody that would love to listen to this story, send them a link and they could subscribe. We did get a new subscriber just the other day, so I kind of forget about that. But I appreciate so much all of you who share this and find strength and a blessing from it. And I'm just happy to share what God leads and inspires with. So God bless you all. Take care. And Lord so willing, we'll see you next week. Bye bye.